to the Code 4 Couples podcast, where our goal is to provide information and topics to keep our hometown heroes' relationships safe in Code 4. I am your host, Cindy Doyle, LEO wife and licensed professional counselor. Today we're going to talk about a great topic, anxiety. Doesn't that sound fun? So part of the reason why I came up with this topic is because a lot of times as an LEO spouse, you are dealing with things like sleeping alone. You might be thinking about how your LEO is in danger. So I think anxiety, or at least some nervousness, is really something that all of us deal with. And LEOs do too. As a law enforcement officer or as a first responder, you probably deal with some other anxieties, maybe things that you're not there to be able to protect your family if something happens because you're on shift. So I thought the topic was a really relevant one. And so I thought we'd bring it forward and talk about it. I keep saying So as a LEO or first responder spouse, some of the things that I've heard in regard to anxiety is when you're having to sleep alone, you're thinking about his safety or her safety, if you're a guy. It can also be like family relationship issues, going to social events because you've got to constantly explain where your spouse is. Maybe you're worried about infidelity in your relationship. Maybe there's badge bunnies that are driving you up a wall. Or maybe, the department is really close and you don't know what's going on. Maybe you're fearing the reaction of your spouse when you get home. And I think that can be on both sides. As an officer or first responder, you could, one of the things that you could be worried about is what's your spouse going to be reacting to because you're not home, because you're not there to help out. Are you worried about their fidelity or infidelity and what they're doing when you're not at home? Maybe worried about what you're missing with your family. Not having downtime can cause a lot of anxiety because you're constantly going. You're coming home from shift, getting sleep, getting something to eat, and leaving. So not having that downtime and anxiety about when that's going to come. Departmental issues could be a reason for anxiety. And once again, kind of the safety of your family and the fact that you might not be able to protect them because you might be dealing with bigger issues at the time. That's something to think about as a law enforcement or first responder family, what you're having to do is to go into the danger. We've talked about that before. You're going into that danger, and so you're not always going to be able to be there to watch out for your family. And so that could bring on some anxiety and what's going on when you're not home. And the other thing I think about as far as a officer or a first responder is getting called out. Kind of always having that low level anxiety of whether you're going to get a phone call that you need to come in, or that you find out something's happened in the department that is going to impact you. So there's lots of reasons to have that anxiety. Now, I will tell you that I cannot tell you how to cure anxiety in a 20-minute podcast. So do not think that you're going to get the cure. That would also be really unethical of me to think that I had some kind of magic, because if I did, trust me, that would be in a bottle and I would be selling it. And we don't mean Xanax. So there is, just keep in mind that in this podcast, what I'm going to do is kind of give you some tips and some tools. But do not expect a solution, and do not say that I have solved and cured anxiety about that. Just a little disclosure there. So I do want to kind of point out the different forms of anxiety. And sometimes people don't, especially when they're coming into my office, they don't necessarily realize that they have anxiety because it comes out in a different way. One way that it really comes out is anger. So a lot of times anger is a reaction to our inability to take care of a situation. And so we get angry. And so people present sometimes as angry, but when we dig down, it's really more of an anxiety related issue. It can also manifest as depression, and obviously can manifest as worry. The other way it can manifest that people don't really realize is it can manifest in addiction issues. So whether that's, or numbing behavior, so whether that's like eating a lot or eating poorly or drug and alcohol use or shopping, it can manifest in all different kinds of ways. So just remember that sometimes the behavior, we use behavior to kind of numb the feeling inside. One of the things that I say a lot in the office is I always say, like, depression and anxiety are married and anger is their baby. So I don't know if that you can relate to that or not, but I think I see how they all kind of come together. So just because somebody is getting puffy doesn't necessarily mean, they have anger issues. Sometimes it can be something underneath that they're really worried or they have a concern. So why do we have this anxiety? Where does it come from? Nobody wants it, trust me. I had somebody in my office this week who said, you know what, screw anxiety, I would rather have depression. And that, I think, is the truth, because anxiety you just feel like your squirrel is constantly going inside, going and just wants to get out. It can be painful almost. So why do we have anxiety? Where does it come from? So overall, it can be our personal experiences, maybe some of our past issues that maybe laid down what I call roots. So those roots might be a part of what causes us to have anxiety. It could be the media. If you think about what we see in the media, we don't see a lot of like, oh, hey, this many officers went home safe today, or this many first responders were safe today. We hear about the shootings, we hear about the bad stuff. And so that the media is a really big part of it. Social media is a big part of it. Comparison is a part of that as well. Like, I'm supposed to be something that I'm not able to be. Look at that family. We don't have that. So anxiety about that. Sometimes it's being worried about what people think or how people see us. It can also be due to our own self-worth issues. And that gets into, it's a deep topic. But our own self-worth, like if we are worried about, if we don't think that we're deserving of a relationship, then I might be constantly worried about my spouse leaving me. And throw in the fact that he's on shift work, that is just going to feed that little monster and going down that road. So those can be some reasons why. I mentioned roots. Roots can be our beliefs about events. So if we can't control the event, but we can control the belief. And so a lot of times if we have a negative belief about an event, it winds up having an emotional consequence, which can be anxiety. So that could be part of it. The other big part that I work on a lot with people that come into my office is stinking thinking. It is the negative way that we see the world. And there are all kinds of things. We call them cognitive traps not in my office. They're called cognitive traps. And you can Google that if you want. In fact, I will maybe attach something that gives a list of all these different cognitive traps. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, cognitive behavioral therapy talks a lot about the cognitive traps or stinking thinking, or sometimes I have people and say, I've been diagnosed with dysfunctional thinking. And I'm like, yeah, that's not really a diagnosis. That's what we all do. So we all have these thinking errors. We all do this, everybody. So one of the biggest ones, I'm just going to kind of highlight a couple of them. So one of them is what ifing. So think about this. If you're going, what if, da 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 da, I can guarantee you're not going, what if he comes home safe and everything's fine and he's loyal to me and everything's great? You're not doing that. You're not doing that at all. You're saying, oh my God, what if there's a really bad event tonight? What if some butthead, I'm editing that, like I could make that worse, but I'm saying butthead. What if some butthead is on crack and decides to attack my guy or attack my officer tonight? What if somebody stabs him and he gets AIDS or some other kind of disease? So we don't what if positive things. We what if the really crappy ones. So what ifing? That would be a stinking thinking. Catastrophic thinking. So thinking the worst possible thing that could happen. And catastrophizing a situation as opposed to saying, okay, wait, hold on. What do I really know about this? So I call that like the runaway train. The other one is mind reading. Like, I know what people are thinking, or I know what's really going on here. I know, like, you're able to read people's minds or look into a crystal ball. Once again, if any of us could do that, we would all be millionaires. And then one that I run into a lot with my first responders and law enforcement, specifically law enforcement officers, is black and white thinking. Oh my gosh, so much black and white thinking. But think about this. So first of all, black and white thinking is right, wrong. You know, there's a clear line here. There's no gray, which is very helpful in a law enforcement world, right? There's a law or there's breaking the law. There is not like, oh, I'm a little bit pregnant, you're pregnant or you're not. So that's really helpful when you're dealing with the law. There is a clear line. It's not a whole lot of gray. Now, that's not to say there are plenty of gray situations in the law enforcement world, but being able to think in a black and white way, this is the law, they broke it, this is what I need to do, or nope, it doesn't meet the standard, I'm not going to go forward with this. Because ultimately, what they're doing is they're having to put a case together at some point in time, and while that's not their responsibility, they have to have that very clear line. You know, another very clear line is right and wrong. That's part of what keeps our law enforcement from going to the dark side, I'm going to call it. And so having that clear line is really important. However, it can cause anxiety because if you don't have that clear line of black, white, if you're not able to do that and there's this gray area, that gray area can be really uncomfortable for some people. It can be a not knowing, and so that can cause anxiety as well. Ultimately, a lot of anxiety is about a lack of control. So if you think about that, you're not going to be able to control what happens while he's on shift or while she's on shift. You're not going to be able to control what happens at home while you're not there or when you're asleep. You're not going to be able to control a lot of situations. And so because we don't have control, that also causes us to have anxiety. Part of the reason why we come up with the what ifing or these what I'm going to say, the stinking thinking, the dysfunctional thoughts, is we're afraid that something bad's going to happen to us. And so our brain thinks that it's helpful to start to try to predict these things because for some reason our brain thinks, oh, if I can predict that, then I'm going to be able to protect us or protect myself from that. So if I'm thinking, oh, you know what, I hope she's not at home sleeping with somebody. But if she is, what if she is? And then I start to get prepared for that. And somehow my brain thinks that's helpful. No, but my brain thinks that way. So they're always used to protect ourselves from something bad happening. unfortunately, what that does is that our brain then thinks, oh, there's this event happening. I need to prepare for it. And so there's a biological reason why anxiety happens, which is your fight or flight response. So when you have that, and I want to distinguish between two things. You have a physical feeling a lot of times with anxiety, and then you have like what I'm going to call the emotion that we label anxiety. So this physical feeling is really the first thing, and then we have these labels that we put on it called anxiety. And then there's also this behavior, the thinking behavior that goes along with it. So biologically, when you start to entertain these things, your body goes into fight or flight. So that fight or flight response, if you're not familiar with that, is actually a biological response where in the past, if there was a giant grizzly bear that came after us, then our body responded. We ran away, got the heck out of Dodge, or we went up a tree, or we got our dagger or, spear and stabbed the crap out of them. And so the other one is freeze. So it's fight, flight, or freeze. And so freezing, like, I'm going to roll over and play dead. That would be a freezing aspect. So our body still does this. And when it senses that there is something to react to respond to, it goes into this fight or flight response, which is biological. Your frontal lobe actually shuts down. So that's where all your critical thinking is done. So to think through things in a logical way, like, goes away, and we react in a primal way, which is based upon the amygdala in the brain. You didn't know you were getting a biology lesson a day, did you? So the amygdala goes off, the fight or flight response goes off, our heart rate goes up, our breathing goes up, our digestive system shuts down, cortisol is released. There's all of these biological things that happen to us in that fight or flight response. But what happens is, because there's nothing to fight against, our body attacks itself. So if you think about, like, it's prepared to fight or flight, there's nothing to fight, and so your mind kind of starts attacking itself, like, but what if this? And it starts trying to fight something that's not really there, because you're just predicting the future, or you're what-ifing, or you're mind reading. So I hope that makes sense. Like, anxiety is caused from that fight or flight response, which is caused by the thinking or the fear or the lack of control. So now that you know what it is, how it's caused, what do you do about this? Because you're in bed at night and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so anxious because of that. I do love, there's this old Mad TV clip on YouTube, and it has Bob Newhart in it. And this woman goes in and she's like, I hear you're the best therapist. And he says, yes, I'll have you cured in 5 minutes. She's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. She's like, how much? And he says, $5 for the 5 minutes. And she's like, okay. And he says, are you ready? And she says, yes. And he says, stop it. And I love that he just says, stop it. Anyway, it's a funny clip. You can Google it. But stopping it is easier said than done. So if somebody says, well, just stop thinking about it. Yeah, they don't get it. It's not that easy to just stop thinking about it. So I'm going to give you a couple techniques or a couple things that you can do to help with some of the anxiety. The first thing, well, not the first thing, what I always focus on is our behaviors and our beliefs. Those are really the only two things that we can control in our whole entire world. So I can't control what goes on in the world. I can only control the way I respond to it or my belief about the situation. So the first thing I'm going to recommend is breathing. And I know people get annoyed sometimes. They're like, God, quit telling me to breathe. But breathing is one of the few ways that we can control or change that fight or flight response. So what you have to do is you have to do some very deep breaths. This can also be tactical breathing. So if you're a law enforcement officer, one of the things that you have to be able to do is you have to be able to calm your body down in order to take that shot. And this is one of the things that I've learned from my hubby is the fact that when you take that shot, you take a deep breath in, you hold it, you squeeze the trigger, and then you slowly release. And that is the tactical breathing. So doing that breathing helps, because if you control your breathing and slow your breathing down, your body goes, oh, I guess there's nothing to really respond to. I think I'm okay. So what I recommend is you taking long, deep breaths in, and you can do this. You're going to think I'm silly, but go get a straw. Better yet, go get a cocktail straw and try to breathe through a cocktail straw. So get a straw, preferably a cocktail straw, and breathe in for like 10 seconds, because it's going to take that long to get the breath you need if you're breathing through a cocktail straw. And then hold it for a few seconds, and then slowly breathe out of the cocktail straw. If you have a cocktail too, that's a different story. However, you just need the cocktail straw. So that can be a really helpful way of understanding how to breathe and how breath can help with that fight or flight response. That is one of the few things that you can do physically to change the fight or flight response. The second thing that I recommend is that you acknowledge what you're feeling. Not just anxiety, but maybe the feeling that goes along with the anxiety. So I'm feeling anxious. Okay, what's underneath that? That the anxiety might be a reaction to something. It might be a reaction to a feeling. So, okay, I'm feeling anxious here laying in bed. What's going on? I'm feeling scared. Okay, why am I scared? I'm scared somebody's going to break in. I feel alone. I feel unsafe. Okay, good. You figured it out. Somebody's going to break in. However, let me give you this example. I feel scared at night because bad things happen at night, and my husband is working at night. And if I go to sleep, then I won't know that bad stuff is happening. And then I won't know that he might be in danger, and I won't know that I need to be scared. And therefore I can't prepare if something happens because I would lose him. And so if I go to sleep, he might die while I'm asleep. That could be a real stream of consciousness for you. And so really it might be helpful to write it out. It might be helpful to, text it to somebody or to talk to somebody about it. It might be helpful to just throw it out there to, I don't know, sometimes I just talk to myself. So just talk it through and figure out, okay, what is this anxiety really about? Sometimes my anxiety is just about being overwhelmed. Like I feel like I have to do all kinds of things. Maybe my anxiety is also about, oh my God, if I don't keep the house quiet, he's going to be so mad. And so sometimes you just have to drill down to what is this about? And sometimes that fear might not be realistic. So just think about what that might go to. Dr. Kristen Neff says that if you name it, you tame it. So if you name what's going on, if you name the feeling and maybe the cause, you can start to have it subside. So spend some time digging into it. So number 1 is breathing. Number 2 is acknowledging the feeling or the thought. Number 3 is finding a different perspective for the belief. So one of the things, I'm going to stick with the sleep example. So one of the things that you can do is kind of change the thought or change the perspective of the thought. Because once again, with anxiety, you're dealing with primarily a negative thought. So what you have to do is, I'm not saying rainbow, sunshine, and unicorns and throw sugar on it, because that doesn't work. I know. But you can have a realistic belief. So let me give you the one that when sleep happens and when I start to feel anxious with sleep, what I might do is I reiterate to myself that I trust my husband's training and his skills. I trust that he is going to try to come home to me at night. He has told me that he will hide under a curb if he needs to on the street. He will flatten himself out and hide under the curb. And then I also have to trust that all of his shift wants to go home too. And so if they want to do that, they are going to have his back and he's going to have their back. And so if I extend that trust and I just concentrate and I think about, okay, you know what? He's got training. I can't control what happens to him, but I can trust that he has the ability to respond to it and that he wants to come home. And I know there is nothing like Velcro coming off at night or in the middle of the morning. My husband laughs because I'm like, God, I love that sound of Velcro. And you get it, you know? So change the perspective or change the belief into something that can be more positive. And sometimes this takes work. Sometimes it takes a lot of work to be able to do this, and maybe you need help doing it. The fourth thing I have is reach out to your support system. Some of your support system may understand, some of them may not. There are actually some really great Facebook communities out there now. I have been on Facebook late at night and I will check in with some of the groups because I have more experience and wisdom and blah, 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 obviously. And so I will check in with some of those Facebook groups late at night to see if somebody's struggling. Because I know at midnight, if you're awake, you're struggling. And so check in with maybe a Facebook community. If you're an officer, check in with another officer because they're struggling with it too. That's the thing is people sometimes think that we're so unique and like I'm the only one who's dealing with this. Trust me, you are not. You are not that unique. We all struggle with anxiety. We all struggle with feelings and thoughts and bad things. So check in. If you're a spouse, find another spouse that you can connect with. Just make friends with somebody. So Facebook communities, another officer or another spouse can be really so incredibly important to be able to get through some of those situations. And maybe even connect with somebody that has more longevity in the system than you do, because they might be able to impart some wisdom. So there you go. All right. So number 5, is there any behavior that you can change? You don't want to feed the monster. So keep this in mind. You don't want to feed it and like start listening to the scanner. That is not going to be a way to ease that anxiety. All that's going to do is amp it up, because then when you don't have the scanner, it's going to be really bad. And you think you're going to have to just constantly listen to the scanner. So instead of doing that, maybe you can change a behavior where you have a nighttime ritual. So maybe saying, okay, at a certain time, if possible, I'm going to send a quick video and my LEO or first responder will send a video back to me. Of course, I'm using the nighttime example again. So I know there's all kinds of apps. I know there's the FaceTime, and I think I don't know how new it is, but Marco Polo is a big one now, I know. So just send a quick video back and forth as a nighttime ritual, or maybe just a text. But once again, you have to understand that sometimes your spouse is not going to be available to respond. So maybe think about something else that, hey, when they can, or right before you leave, maybe you say something to each other. One thing that's a ritual for me and my husband is that we never leave each other without saying, I love you. We always say, I love you. We always kiss, because there is that possibility, hey, this might be the last time, but we are going to make sure that we have this. And sometimes I get after him. I'm like, that was a crappy kiss. I want a good one. And so I'm like, hey, that could be the last kiss to me. And so I may die on the road. You may be fine. I may die. So I want a good kiss. You're going to be sorry if you don't have one. So, I make him do, John Gottman recommends a 6-second kiss. And so I get my 6-second kiss. And that's what I demand, actually. And sometimes he's like, ugh, but he's never, whatever. He doesn't mind. The last thing, number 6, is what I have is talk to your spouse for support, because, they're going to have some struggles too. And it's not their job to fix it. What it is you're looking for, yeah, I get it. That's hard. And maybe they can give you some perspective. Maybe they can give you some idea of, hey, well, this is what happens on the shift. Because when we don't have information, our brain makes up stories. Your brain wants to have an answer. And so it'll make up a story whether it's right or not. And so get information, talk to your spouse, maybe go down, do a ride along. I know I can't go with my guy, but I can go with somebody else. And so, sometimes having that information helps us, and vice versa. If you're a spouse, if you're an officer, get some information about what's going on in your spouse's world. That's really important to keep in mind. Like, share what's really going on and find out what's really going on, and not just say, "Oh, how was your day? Good. How was yours? Good." You got to know what's going on. So, all right. So let me go through those again. Number 1 was breathe. Number 2, acknowledge the feeling and the thought. Number 3, find a different perspective for the belief, or like spin the belief. 4, reach out to some of your support system. 5, is there a behavior you can change or something you can do to get more information? And number 6 was talk to your spouse. So, anxiety can be really paralyzing and overwhelming. And if this is something that you're struggling with and really stuck, then I recommend that you get with a counselor and talk it through. There's many departments that offer employee assistance programs, and those sessions are free. And so you can call your insurance and check that out. I always recommend therapy over drugs first. Drugs are getting on Xanax or getting on an antidepressant some people need them, but a lot of times you've got to talk it through and talk it out. So I really recommend checking into any kind of EAP counseling, or, a lot of times insurance pays for counseling and it's not really expensive. So don't be scared to think, oh, my insurance doesn't cover that. It may. So let me know if this information was helpful. I would love to hear more from you. If you are struggling, or if something I said helped, I would love to hear from you as far as through my social media, or you can send me an email on my website. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. I would love for you to subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoy it, then share it with other law enforcement officer couples or first responder couples. If you would like a transcript to the podcast, it will be available on my website. Other than that, you have a great, fabulous week. Thank you for joining me and listening. And until next time, keep your relationship code 4.